His name is synonymous with treason, and that's all most people know about Benedict Arnold. But prior to becoming history's most notorious traitor, Arnold was one of the American Revolution's most ardent patriots. His bold strategies, courageous leadership, and superhuman endurance inspired his men, infuriated his enemies, and earned the admiration of his commander-in-chief, George Washington. Uncover the forgotten battlefield genius, Benedict Arnold, next on Washington's Generals. Blackheart, traitor, Satan. These epithets have damned Benedict Arnold to the darkest pages of history.
The reason he's bad is he was so good, and that's part of the challenge of getting to know him. Arnold, with all of these incredible accomplishments, how did he become this bad guy? But before you know the bad guy, you better understand the good guy.
Arnold had extraordinary courage, battlefield courage. He was willing to lead from the front. His soldiers respected him for that. Repeatedly wounded in battle. Had horses shot out from under him several times. He was also extraordinarily aggressive and energetic. If you gave Arnold a mission, he wasn't going to sit around. He was going to go and accomplish that mission.
October 23rd, 1775. Somewhere near the Dead River, deep in the Maine wilderness. An American military expedition faces a major crisis. Incessant rain has flooded their camps, drenched their gear, and spoiled their rations. It's just the latest in a series of setbacks that have left the soldiers starving and suffering from exposure. At stake is the future of a vital mission to invade Canada and deal Britain a major blow in the early days of the struggle for independence. Facing plummeting morale and growing doubts, the mission's commander convenes a council of war to convince his officers to press on, despite every reason to turn back. It's a major test of leadership for Colonel Benedict Arnold.
He was a natural-born military leader. He didn't really have much military training. Well, in fact, none going into the Revolution. He learned on the job, so to speak. He understood the notion of inspiring soldiers to perform acts that they might not otherwise have been willing to perform. And so it is that aggressive quality that made him such an outstanding military leader in his particular time.
According to legend, Arnold's military ambitions manifested early. As a teenager in Connecticut, he was apprenticed to an apothecary. Twice, he ran away to join a militia unit to fight in the French and Indian War. But the would-be warrior saw no action. 20 years would pass before he finally got his chance to fight. When the shot heard round the world echoed in April 1775, Arnold was a prosperous 34-year-old seafaring merchant and militia captain. He raced to Boston to be of service in the fledgling revolution. Like many colonists, a potent mixture of patriotic fervor and economic self-interest drew Arnold to the cause. But a deeper, more personal need also moved him to action.
Arnold's background as a boy was growing up in a family with a father who became a hopeless alcoholic when Arnold was about 11. And he watched his father fall from being one of the leading citizens in the town to being the town drunk, the one everyone laughed at. And I think that was galling to him. He always felt that he had something extra to prove.
The War of Independence would give Arnold ample opportunities to prove himself. Arriving in Boston in late April, he presented a plan to the Massachusetts Committee of Safety. His goal was to seize Fort Ticonderoga on New York's Lake Champlain and take its much-needed artillery. The committee authorized Arnold to raise a force and capture the fort, but he had some unwanted competition. Vermont's Ethan Allen and his rowdy Green Mountain Boys also intended to capture the British post. Arnold raced to Ticonderoga alone to assert his command over Allen. But the Green Mountain Boys refused to accept orders from Arnold. Avoiding a crisis, Allen and Arnold compromised. They agreed to share command, a task that would prove more difficult than taking the fort itself. In the pre-dawn hours of May 10, 1775, an American attack force of about 83 men surprised the British and easily subdued the garrison. Ticonderoga changed hands in minutes with barely a shot fired. Then, the real conflict commenced.
When Arnold and Allen got into the fortress and made prisoners of the British and got them all secured, immediately the Green Mountain Boys began to look for loot. And they began to break into the storerooms, and they found the liquor cabinets. And pretty soon they were all rip-roaring drunk. And Arnold, he tried to bring some discipline and order, and all that happened was they laughed him down. A few of them took pot shots at him. So, having no soldiers and no authority over these drunks, he ignored them and went about inventorying the artillery. After all, that was what he was there for.
Ticonderoga gave Arnold his first taste of war and his first glimpse at the unexpected challenges a successful military leader must sometimes overcome. He also learned close up the need for boldness, discipline, and unity of command, lessons he would apply to his next campaign.
Well, the capture of Ticonderoga, I think, whetted Arnold's appetite for bigger and better things. I think it gave him the germ of the idea that Canada might not be that difficult to conquer. And that's one of the things he's going to pitch after he returns from Ticonderoga. He's going to ask for permission to lead an assault on Canada and take Canada out of the war, place it under the control of the Continental Congress.
In the summer of 1775, the idea of invading British-held Canada, specifically the province of Quebec, and making it the 14th colony, was very much on the minds of Congress and Commander-in-Chief George Washington. An army was already assembling on Lake Champlain to strike Montreal when Arnold met with Washington to present another bold scheme. Arnold proposed leading a simultaneous assault on the fortress at Quebec City.
Militarily, that's a very intelligent thing to try to do, because what you don't want to allow the British to do from a strategic point of view is to move a force up the St. Lawrence River, up Lake Champlain, break down to the Hudson River, and drop that force all the way down to New York City and cut New England off from the rest of the provinces. If you do that, New England is the center of the rebellion. It's like cutting off the head of the rebellion. And so Washington and Arnold both see in common that we must take this kind of a dramatic action of invading Canada as a way to better defend ourselves.
To surprise the British at Quebec, Arnold advocated taking a little-known land and water route through the Maine wilderness, the most rugged terrain in all New England. The expedition required an enterprising leader. Arnold convinced Washington he was the man for the job.
What Washington, I think, sees in Arnold is that kind of enthusiasm, plus that broad vision that he would bring to bear. And he probably could feel Arnold's determination as another kind of a quality, because to move an army through a generally unknown wilderness is not an easy assignment. And so Washington sees in Arnold a person who has that kind of magnetism that would allow him to rally the troops.
George Washington maybe saw a lot of himself in Benedict Arnold. Arnold is a man of action. He's a brave man. He's willing to take risks to get things done. I mean, remember George Washington made his reputation as a young man with adventures against the French and the Indians in the Ohio and Pennsylvania wilderness. And Arnold seems to be made from the same mold.
Washington promoted Arnold to colonel and authorized him to raise a force of 1,000 men for the expedition. They departed Cambridge, Massachusetts on September 15, 1775, for what was expected to be a 3-week, 180-mile trek, traveling both on foot and by boat. It would turn into a brutal journey, lasting 8 weeks and covering 350 treacherous miles. Problems plagued the mission from the beginning. Leaking boats, inaccurate maps, back-breaking portages, paralyzing mud, and hurricane-force storms. After 2 weeks, the expedition hasn't even left the settled area of Maine, and there are still more than 100 miles of wilderness ahead of them before they reach the Canadian border. The situation soon becomes desperate. The starving men are forced to eat anything available, including shaving soap, old shoes, and even their dogs. Finally, Arnold confronts grave reality and convenes that council of war to determine the fate of the expedition. For Arnold, there is only one choice: push ahead.
One of Arnold's trump cards always was to tell his men that they had more in them than they had given yet, that there still was a chance for victory, that it was important to the revolution. He clearly thought that once he got to Quebec, it would be a piece of cake. He thought that Quebec was there for the taking. And so if we can just get over these mountains, if we can just get past this river, if we can just get onto the plains of Quebec, then the world's our oyster.
So it's a life or death decision on their part, but he thinks they can do it. He's convinced they can do it, and they all agree to do it with him.
Not quite all. More than a third of the force will be lost to hunger, disease, and desertion. But Arnold never wavers. By November 9th, he has led his men out of the wilderness to the south shore of the St. Lawrence River, opposite the walls of Fortress Quebec. Upon hearing news of Arnold's exploits, Congress promotes him to Brigadier General. Delegates hail him as America's Hannibal, after the legendary 3rd century general who led his men across the Alps in an epic journey to fight the Romans.
Arnold, very early on, develops this heroic image. And because he has effected this breakthrough, instead of Hannibal going through the Alps, this is Arnold going through the mountains of Maine and into Quebec province in Canada. It was just incredibly effective leadership that saved this column from, in many ways, what could have been the possibility of starvation out in the middle of nowhere at that particular point in time.
One fellow officer describes Arnold as our most persevering hero. But getting to Quebec is only half the battle. The objective of the expedition still needs to be achieved. Benedict Arnold's invasion of Canada has only just begun. On November 13th, 1775, Benedict Arnold and his depleted army have finally made it to Quebec City after surviving a harrowing expedition through the Maine wilderness. Despite the hardships, Arnold remains determined to capture the provincial capital and give America a foothold in Canada. The British defenders are ready and waiting with a force that outnumbers the Americans at least 2 to 1. With typical bravado, Arnold lines up his small force a short distance from Quebec's western walls and demands that the British immediately surrender. The British response sends the rebel force fleeing for cover.
And Arnold realizes he doesn't have the ability to assault the city and take. He doesn't have the weapons. He doesn't have the numbers. But he keeps it under siege, waiting for the American forces, the other American forces who have been fighting at Montreal, to come to join him. So his job, as he sees it, is to just keep the British pinned in, and he carries that off. They do stay behind their walls.
On December 2nd, General Richard Montgomery arrives from Montreal with reinforcements. As the senior officer, Montgomery takes command of the operation, with Arnold's full support. They agree that they can't maintain a siege indefinitely. A new course of action must be taken, and soon.
It's a very important point because these rebel soldiers were operating on short-term enlistments, and most of them were up at the end of the year, that is December 31st. And so that army could have just disappeared and gone home. And so what Montgomery and Arnold know is they've got to mount this attempt to take the walled city before January 1st. And then luck seems to be on their side. A driving snowstorm begins to build December 30th. They decide, let's execute the plan.
The plan calls for Montgomery to lead a force into the lower town on the St. Lawrence side of Quebec. At the same time, Arnold will lead another force along the St. Charles side and link up with Montgomery. The combined rebel force will then fight its way uphill through a gate in the upper town. In the pre-dawn hours of December 31st, the Americans launched their two-pronged assault. Knowing that the stakes can't be higher, every man in the attack force pins to his hat a paper proclaiming liberty or death. A more accurate slogan might have been liberty or disaster. An American defector had tipped off the British defenders. The Patriot attack was doomed from the start. One of the first casualties is General Montgomery. He's blown away by a blockhouse full of heavily armed British soldiers lying in wait. Without their leader, Montgomery's force beats a hasty retreat. Arnold's wing doesn't fare much better.
On Arnold's side, they get to a defended area, and the British began to fire at them from above, and a musket ball ricochets off a stone wall or a rock and into his leg. So he's knocked out of action right away. The second in command is Daniel Morgan, who's right there, and he has Arnold carried away, and he continues the attack.
Arnold wasn't a man to give up, and even as he was being carried back from the fort with his leg bleeding, the troops coming forward, he was exhorting them to go forward and win the day. The battle wasn't over. Keep going, men.
But Arnold's exhortations will be to no avail. The fighting rages until daybreak. By then, the British have regrouped, and Arnold's men, under Daniel Morgan's command, are soon captured. Arnold, still defiant, refuses to concede defeat. From his bed in a makeshift hospital, he arms himself with 2 pistols and a sword.
And if you want to look into this man's fighting character, what kind of a battler he is, you don't see anything that makes it clearer than his actions after he finds out that their attack has failed. He tells the surviving Americans, give me weapons. We wounded men, we will fight from the hospital. The rest of you fight from your positions. Whether the British are just not prepared themselves to come out, or they don't want to face them, or they don't know how badly hurt the Americans are, they decide not to come.
News of the disaster shocks the Continental Congress. The delegates called for major reinforcements, but it is too late. The arrival of spring brings thousands more British troops. An American retreat from Canada is inevitable.
Arnold's view was very much that they had to go fighting. He did the destroy as you leave tactic, which is unusual in those days. And so he made sure that the British, that forts were destroyed as he retreated and so on. And he wanted to keep it orderly. He wanted to keep it so that Americans weren't leaving in what would look like a rout. He wanted it to look like a strategic withdrawal, if you will, even though it was a pretty decisive defeat. He again showed his leadership simply by keeping his troops, whose instinct was to run away, in somewhat of an orderly fashion.
On June 18, 1776, with Arnold in charge of the rear guard, the remnants of the rebel invasion force pull out of St. John's, their last defensive post in Canada. With the British nipping at their heels, Arnold shoots his horse, denying the enemy his mount. Then he boards the last boat, fleeing south.
Arnold comes out of Canada, obviously a disappointed person because the whole invasion had failed. He takes his first step, perhaps, inside his mind toward treason, because he blames Congress for the lack of support. They didn't provide the wherewithal to allow the Americans to succeed. They didn't send them reinforcements. They didn't send them money. They didn't support them until it was too late. And he thinks if Congress had just been more serious about this, we could have taken Quebec, we could have taken Canada. There was no need for us to lose that.
Arnold may have been disappointed, but he wasn't defeated. When the British advance out of Canada to invade the colonies, Benedict Arnold would be leading the charge to victory and controversy. By the summer of 1777, Benedict Arnold had recuperated from the wounds he suffered during the battle for Quebec. He was now a major general, even though Congress had originally passed him over for the promotion, leaving Arnold angry and frustrated.
Arnold had a distorted sense of personal honor. He craved respectability and he craved recognition. When he didn't get the recognition that he thought he deserved, he really took offense to that, resigned several times, and I think his treason was partially a result of this exaggerated sense of personal honor and failure to receive recognition that he thought he was due.
Arnold had a tremendous pride. He was quarrelsome. He didn't always get along with his superiors. He had a good knack for making enemies, and I suppose that he lacked diplomatic skills.
Arnold now served under Horatio Gates, the newly appointed commander of the Northern Army operating in upstate New York. Their differences would lead to a bitter private battle.
Gates thinks that Arnold is a competitor. He becomes basically jealous of Arnold and what Arnold has achieved. And he would just as soon not have Arnold there with him. He's happy to have his leadership ability, but he's not very comfortable with this guy at all because Gates is not a warrior. Gates has never led troops in combat. He is unsure of himself, and Arnold is reputed to be, and from what he's demonstrated, the best fighting general in the American Army.
Arnold and Gates, however, did agree on their mission: stop a British army under General John Burgoyne that was advancing out of Canada. Burgoyne's goal was to break through to Albany. There he could link up with British forces in New York City, control the Hudson River, and deal the revolution a decisive blow. John Burgoyne was one of the most colorful generals on either side of the revolution. Gentleman Johnny, as his troops dubbed him, loved the theater and gambling. A supremely confident commander, he had made a bet with a colleague that America would be defeated within a year. On September 19th, Burgoyne and his army of 7,500 soldiers make their advance near the Freeman Farm, just south of Saratoga, New York. Arnold and Gates sharply disagree on what to do about it.
Gates is looking to conduct a defensive strategy for this campaign. The British are at the end of a very long line of supply. They're far from support. They still have to move to Albany. Gates realizes that he has the advantage if he remains on the defensive. And actually, he's very wise in doing that. Arnold, who is always aggressive, is not content to stay on the defensive. He wants to strike at the British whenever possible, and that is the crux of the disagreement.
Arnold is laying it to Gates, saying, we've got to do something, we've got to do something. We have a very strong position here, but we don't want to be overrun, so we have to find ways to challenge them. We have to get a sense of how they're approaching us, what their battle plan is. We need knowledge, and the only way we're going to get knowledge is to send out some of our special forces.
Gates remains committed to his defensive strategy. He lets the British come to him and is reluctant to order any of his 7,000 troops to attack. But Arnold persists.
And finally, Gates gives him permission to move forward, probably just to get rid of him more than anything else. He says you can take out the light infantry and the Rangers and reinforce them with your own musket regiments, but you're not going to get anything else. You're not going to get any more troops from our line. That's all Arnold wanted.
Commanding the Army's left wing, Arnold immediately springs into action. First, he fans out the riflemen and the light infantry. Then, detecting a gap in the British line, Arnold feverishly organizes a series of charges to smash through and roll up the redcoats. According to an officer on the scene, Arnold seems inspired by the fury of a demon.
And at the critical moment, Arnold says, we've got them. If we just put some more troops in here, they don't have anything else to commit to the fight. He rides back, begs Gates, implores, as he puts it, implores and begs for reinforcements. And Gates finally says, well, you can have one regiment. Arnold starts back with that regiment. Gates stops him, has him called back, and puts him basically in house arrest.
The reasons for doing that are rather unclear. The explanation that was given by one not very reliable source was that, well, Gates was concerned that Arnold would bring on a disaster. But whatever the reasoning was, it was a bad decision on Gates's parts because the troops that will then march out don't know where to go.
The Americans lose momentum. As darkness sets in, fighting ceases, and the first battle at Saratoga ends. Burgoyne still occupies the battlefield, but Gates is satisfied. He has prevented the British Army from breaking through to Albany. Arnold, on the other hand, feels the chance for a great victory has been lost.
Arnold is really angry at Gates, and Gates is more jealous than ever. After that day of fighting, Arnold's reputation has ballooned, and Gates' reputation has gone down. The soldiers know he wasn't on the battlefield. He got his nickname there of Granny Gates, and that nickname just flies around the camp. Oh, Granny Gates wasn't even out of his hut. So Gates is chagrined. This man who always overshadowed him as a fighter has even done it more now.
Perhaps out of spite, Gates failed to mention Arnold in his after-action report to Congress a few days later. Suspicious of this glaring oversight, Arnold confronted Gates.
Arnold went ballistic. This was the ultimate insult. To not credit those who had really contributed that particular day was not only an insult to Arnold, it was an insult to every soldier who fought under him. And Arnold took this very, very personally. He felt that Gates was condescending toward him anyway, and they really go ahead and have a good old-fashioned shouting argument, is the best way to put it.
The outcome of that argument would have a major impact on the Second Battle of Saratoga, the revolution itself, and the fate of Benedict Arnold. At the end of the First Battle of Saratoga, a war of words erupted between Benedict Arnold and his commanding general, Horatio Gates.
One of the reasons that Arnold had such a troubled relationship with Gates over the years is that he viewed military life as a life of quick decisions, of action. He hated paper pushers. Arnold's attitude to Saratoga would be, there's a battle to be won. What are you sitting in your tent for when you should be out there leading the troops? We can win this today. And that was his style. He was very much in your face. Let's not sit around and debate this for a while. There's a job to be done, and if no one else will do it, I will do it. And I will probably do it better than anybody else.
As the feud escalates, Gates ridicules Arnold and threatens to replace him. Enraged, Arnold demands a pass to join Washington's army in Pennsylvania. Gates is only too willing to get Arnold out of camp. When word spreads of Arnold's imminent departure, unease spreads among the troops. Officers sign a petition asking him to stay. Each signature represents a stinging criticism of Gates and a ringing endorsement of Arnold.
And that allows Arnold, I think, really to save face. And he doesn't want to pull out at that point because he's devoted himself for 2 full years to trying to effect the defeat of the British in the North. And so he doesn't want to leave.
The appeal works. Arnold reconsiders and remains. But Gates is unforgiving.
Gates' response is, well, I relieve you of command of the left wing. I'll take charge of it myself. So he strips Arnold of command as a way of saying, I'm still in charge of the army regardless of what the officers think. And that then will set up the brilliant battle confrontation that occurs in the second engagement on October 7th.
On that day, Burgoyne resumes his mission to break through to Albany. Arnold isn't on the field. Gates has confined him to his quarters. In Arnold's absence, Daniel Morgan, his old comrade and rifleman leader, urges the defensive-minded Gates to take action. Gates orders Arnold's men to, in his words, begin the game. About 3,000 soldiers storm into battle, driving back the British left and right and holding steady in the center.
The momentum is sitting on edge. Well, Arnold is sitting back in his tent, and if there's one thing this man is constitutionally incapable of doing, it's avoiding a fight. And he finally gets his horse, jumps on his horse, rides to the battle. No command, no authority, just himself. And he rides into a group of troops, and they recognize him and cheer. And he says, we'll have them all in hell before the night's out, boys, and takes them in a charge against the British position.
Furious, Gates sends an aide to bring Arnold back, but the young officer soon loses sight of the frenzied general. The British repulse the first charge with withering blasts of grape shot and musket fire. Undaunted, Arnold whirls into action yet again.
As a tactical commander, Arnold is outstanding. Very few others have the type of charisma, the type of courage on the battlefield, the type of aggressiveness that Benedict Arnold demonstrates.
He acts like a madman. There's maybe 100, 200 yards that separate the two armies, and he rides up and down in no man's land out there. Never touched, never a bullet gets near him. And he finally sees that the British have made a terrible mistake. They've left an opening. There are 2 redoubts, one of which has most of the enemy troops in it. The other, which is on the enemy's right flank, is lightly defended, and he realizes if they can take that redoubt, they roll up the entire British line, and the battle can be won right there.
In unison with Daniel Morgan and his riflemen, Arnold leads a furious assault on the redoubt. Startled at Arnold's sudden appearance, the defenders fire a lethal volley straight into the heart of the Continental charge. One shot kills Arnold's horse. Another tears through Arnold's left leg.
The horse comes crashing down on Arnold. His leg is crushed, and Arnold basically will be a functioning cripple in many ways for the rest of his life. He'll be hobbling around until the day of his death. And so Arnold is on the ground, but the troops will swarm in over him. Morgan's troops will come, and they'll take the redoubt. They break the line. And once you break the line, you just roll it up from the left to your right, and the Burgoyne's position is no longer tenable. So that as dark is settling on the scene, Arnold is writhing on the ground, wounded, but the Americans have succeeded in driving the British backward, and this is now the beginning of the end of Burgoyne's army.
When Henry Dearborn, commander of the light infantry, comes upon Arnold, he asks the wounded general where he's hit. Arnold allegedly replies, "In the same leg," referring to the wound he had suffered in Quebec. He then adds, "I wish it had been my heart."
And people have taken that ever since as saying he had a death wish. He got involved in that fight that day wanting to die. Well, maybe he did or maybe he didn't. But if he had been killed instead of just wounded, at that moment, he never would have lived to become the traitor. And today, he would be an icon in American military history. There would be a state named Arnold, cities named Arnold. People whose last names Arnold would rush to name their kids Benedict. He would have been one of America's premier warrior heroes.
On October 17th, Burgoyne surrendered. The victory became the turning point of the revolution, securing French support for the American cause. Horatio Gates accepted Burgoyne's sword and became known as the hero of Saratoga. But the combatants on the field felt otherwise, including Burgoyne himself. To a fellow officer, he wrote that it was because of Benedict Arnold that he had lost the battle.
In the end, the driving force that brought the British to the point of having to surrender was Benedict Arnold, because he wasn't afraid to go out and challenge them, and he put himself at total risk in both battles by becoming that leader out front. He wasn't back behind the lines as Gates was, but he was that leader out front, and so I would rate him as the real hero of Saratoga.
But the hero was about to turn villain. The next time Benedict Arnold rode into battle, he would be wearing red. Following the Battle of Saratoga, Benedict Arnold spent nearly a year recovering from the crippling injury to his left leg. George Washington appointed Arnold to serve an administrative role as the military commander of Philadelphia after the British evacuated the city in June of 1778.
He finds himself walking into a snake pit of politics. He's trying to conduct a kind of conciliatory administration and treat the loyalists with a certain amount of decency, so they'll be won over to the American cause. That's what Washington wants. But the Pennsylvania politicians say he's a sellout, that he's a closet Tory, and they accuse him of corruption, and he's brought before a court of inquiry, and he gets a gentle slap on the hand. But he feels that his honor has been sullied, that he has been kicked by people for whom he's made all these tremendous sacrifices, and it gets him fed up.
Fed up to the point of doing the unthinkable. While in Philadelphia, Arnold initiated secret negotiations with the British to commit treason. The question of why has occupied historians for more than 200 years.
I think Arnold's treason was rooted in a number of things. It wasn't a simple issue. First of all, it was rooted in money, and that's the charge, and it's true. He began the revolution as a fairly wealthy Connecticut trader and spent almost all of his fortune on the revolution. He bargained with the Brits to get a payment for going over. So clearly money was part of it. And clearly pride was part of it. He felt underappreciated by the Americans. He always was being undermined in his view. He was never being rewarded properly for what he was doing. People who didn't, in his view, deserve honor and reward were being rewarded when he wasn't. He was always being bypassed.
There were other people who had defeats, who had politicians who didn't agree with them, who had people trying to remove them, who lost money, who spent their own funds. George Washington had all of those, but they didn't become traitors. They became stronger, they withstood the adversity, they persevered, and they remained heroes. Arnold crumbled under that. He crumbled under it.
The secret negotiations lasted more than a year. The British offered Arnold a generalship and 20,000 pounds sterling, about $1 million in today's money. In return, Arnold agreed to surrender West Point, a fortification of vital importance on the Hudson River. Arnold wouldn't be the only turncoat in the Revolution, but he would be the most prominent.
Arnold was in an entirely different situation for two reasons. One, he was renowned as the greatest combat leader America had. It would be like in the World War II, perhaps, George Patton declaring that he had been a Nazi all along and was now fighting for Hitler. It was that unbelievable. People couldn't comprehend it. So there was a shock effect because it was Arnold. Secondly, he decided not just to turn coat, but to destroy America when he did it, to turn over West Point. Not just turn it over, sell it. He was going to sell it to the British. It was a business deal as well as a traitorous deal.
The deal collapsed in a debacle in late September 1780. New York militiamen captured John Andre, Arnold's go-between to the British, and discovered the plans of West Point hidden in his boot. When Arnold found out, he escaped to a British ship on the Hudson. The following year, British General Benedict Arnold led a loyalist army on raids in Virginia and his home state of Connecticut. With no remorse, he fought just as hard for the crown as he had for we the people. After the war, Arnold resettled in London with his wife and children, but the British never fully accepted him. Once a traitor, always a traitor. He died in England in 1801 at age 60, despised by some, distrusted by most, and forgotten by the rest. A man without a country, banished to the shadows of history.
Arnold, the myth is that he was a blackguard, and I don't know that that will ever change. I think, though, if you look logically at the years between 1775 and 1778, he several times did acts of valiant battle and of generalship, which really, if not saved the revolution, certainly kept it alive, certainly gave Washington a bit more time to marshal his forces and to prepare his attacks and his defense. So I think Arnold's role in the crucial early years of the Revolution clearly are underappreciated by the American mythologies around him.
For all of his strengths and for all the brilliant battlefield heroics, he was a flawed man, a man without depth of character, and that undermined him.
A reconsideration of Arnold presents a difficult task. To dismiss him completely ignores his heroic service at the birth of the nation. Yet to acknowledge that service, in the minds of many, somehow excuses his treason. The collective memory struggles somewhere between the impulse to forget. Nowhere is that struggle better illustrated than at the Saratoga battlefield. There, a monument stands with a conspicuous sculpture of a left boot. Its inscription reads, "To the most brilliant soldier of the Continental Army, who was desperately wounded on this spot, winning for his countrymen the decisive battle of the American Revolution." That most brilliant soldier's name appears nowhere on the monument.